Today I'm going to be covering some information from Stanford University's Healthy Futures presentation related to their tobacco prevention toolkit. What I'm going to be doing is going through their slides that they've provided as well as some of their own talking points that they've discussed. I don't represent Stanford University in any way, I'm just covering the information and know that any of the extra things that I put in this are of my own opinion. Likewise, as you watch this, feel free to have your own opinion. Feel free to agree or disagree with me. Just know that almost everything that I will be saying in this is directly backed up by research, statistics, and other data that they've pulled, most of it extremely recent. I'll be going slide to slide and covering topics related to tobacco prevention. They'll specifically be covering vaping, e-cigarettes, and cigarettes in general. If it contains nicotine, then know that it would wrap up in this. Even if I'm not mentioning smokeless tobacco, that contains nicotine, so it's going to fall into some of the same things. Most of the teenagers and adults that I know who use tobacco products that I've talked to have mentioned that they recognize that there are a lot of negatives to using tobacco products. And what I think this program does really well is it covers it from every angle. Most people know that tobacco products have a negative effect on the body, and this presentation will cover those. Most people know that tobacco products have a negative effect on the pocketbook, and this program is going to go pretty in depth on those as well. I like that this kind of gives a well-rounded approach. Most people who use tobacco products know that there are negatives, but I think they don't recognize how deep those negatives go. And the Healthy Futures program covers that pretty well. So we're going to go ahead and get right into these slides. As you go through, you may be using a program like Nearpod, Edpuzzle. There's a Google form attached that you may be using as well. You're going to be using something to answer these questions, even if it's just pencil and paper. If you want to take notes as you go through the presentation, that's completely fine. Feel free to pause the video at any time. If you're giving this as a presentation, you can do that as well. Let's go ahead and get rolling with this. We're going to ask some warm-up questions to kind of get you thinking about e-cigarettes, vaping, tobacco products, and why you use them. Starting out with this one, what do you like about vaping and using e-cigs? Let's move to this next one. What do you not like about vaping and using e-cigs? And a third question, what do you think are the long-term health effects of vaping? We're going to kind of stick with this one as our first talking point, looking at the health effects of vaping, e-cigarettes, tobacco, and nicotine in general on the human body. Let's start with this. E-cigarettes have not been around for a long time, but research on the short-term health effects is present and there is a lot of it. As a review, nicotine negatively impacts your brain, turning it against you by hijacking the reward pathway of your brain. Using nicotine can make your heart beat faster because it activates what's called your fight or flight response. The aerosol included in these products damages specific cells in your circulatory system. Ultimately, this increases your risk for heart disease, which is serious. Nicotine salt e-liquids produce a faster heart rate than other non-nicotine salt e-liquids. So what we mean by this is that the nicotine on its own in these products can cause trouble breathing and damage to the lungs over time. Your lungs are not designed to have anything else in them besides oxygen. They can't break down all of the chemicals that are in e-cigarette aerosols, so they begin to have trouble. The lung damage caused by e-cigarette aerosol increases the chances for lung injury and ultimately lung disease. Nicotine can cause increased things like acid reflux as well. Last but not least, nicotine can even negatively impact your reproductive organs. Essentially, nicotine, while it seems like it doesn't really have too much of an effect in the present, can over time cause problems for your body. And that includes problems in the lungs. A recent study on e-cigarettes found that using them raises someone's risk of developing a long-term lung disease. This means using e-cigs for a few years could develop things like bronchitis, which is inflammation and irritation of major airways in your body. These airways are responsible for exchanging air in and out of your lungs, so obviously they're pretty important. Emphysema can also be developed over time from using e-cigs. Emphysema is the destruction of air sacs in the lungs, which is a common disease that long-term cigarette smokers develop. Alveoli, the air sacs in your lungs, are the places in the body where fresh oxygen is delivered and carbon dioxide is removed. Other lung diseases linked to e-cigarettes include asthma and chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. Those who use both e-cigarettes and cigarettes, which unfortunately is a lot of people, are at an even higher risk of developing a lung disease and or heart disease compared to someone only using e-cigarettes or only using cigarettes. Combined, they're actually worse. Damaging this lung tissue could lead to a chain reaction of other health complications. Less oxygen will be sent to the brain, which means less oxygen to the organ and tissues in the body. Other studies have confirmed that e-cigarette use weakens the lung's immune response to infection, making it harder for the lungs to fight off harmful viruses and bacteria. A whole lot of people will argue with you and say they've only used e-cigarettes or vaping for a short amount of time. Maybe they've only tried it a few times. They've only had it in their pocket a few weeks. I have talked to countless people who start it and it becomes the thing that goes from days to weeks to months to years to decades as far as anything that involves nicotine. Once you start, it's incredibly hard to stop, but it's very possible. And the sooner you can stop using these products, the less chance you'll have of these major issues you could have health-wise, especially in your lungs and respiratory system. This next slide is going to cover something called EVALI, E-V-A-L-I. And what this is a specific case that's been happening recently regarding e-cigarettes and vaping. Let's start with, we know that e-cigarette aerosol damages the lungs and increases the chances of developing a lung disease later in life. What if the aerosol or one chemical from vaping cause severe damage to the lungs after just a few hits? Instead of talking about a more long-term problem, we're talking about something that could happen at any time. In August of 2019, this did begin to happen. People were hospitalized for injured lungs from vaping. This outbreak was later named EVALI, which stands for e-cigarette or vaping product use associated lung injury. Most EVALI patients reported using THC containing products, and most said that they got their products only from informal sources. So in this case, they got them from friends, family, dealers, people like that. If you didn't know, THC is the chemical found in cannabis or marijuana that gives users a buzz or a high. Scientists found vitamin E acetate, an oily chemical found in some THC containing e-liquid, in the lungs of EVALI patients and in e-cigarettes and vape products that the patients said they used. Vitamin E acetate was most likely the cause of this outbreak. Breathing in vitamin E acetate can cause inflammation of the airways and interfere with normal lung functioning. To add to this is the first time we've seen a vaping device cause sudden, immediate, serious, and unfortunately fatal damage to the lungs. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, better known as the CDC, recommends to not use THC containing e-cigarette and vape products, particularly from informal sources like family, friends, dealers, and other sources. Since these products are not regulated by the government, there is no guarantee that any part of an e-cigarette is safe for your health. Something that can always be sure of is that your lungs are the most happy and safe when you only breathe in oxygen and clean air. Not all vaping products contain THC, of course, but it's still something to keep in mind if you are somebody who has ever tried products that contain THC. At the same time, keep in mind where you've bought these products before. They're probably not regulated in the ways that you think, and because of that, they could be dangerous. I'm going to be attaching a video to this presentation. You can find it in the link that covers this topic instead of going into it in depth here. Essentially, smoking and vaping and using cigarettes and tobacco can make somebody's response to COVID-19 less effective. COVID-19 affects people in different ways, and unfortunately, vaping and tobacco products can make the body's response less powerful than it normally would be, which is concerning for a lot of people. Continuing on that thread with discussion on what should be concerning, one of the things that's most concerning about these products is their effect to the heart. The evidence is that e-cigarettes, including products like Juul, increases cardiovascular or heart rate risk. That evidence is piling up. The heart is the center for pumping blood throughout a complex network of blood vessels in the body. These blood vessels are responsible for delivering fresh oxygen to organs or tissues. Your cells need oxygen to survive and work properly. Scientists have discovered that e-cigarette aerosol from using or breathing in secondhand aerosols can impair the function of blood vessels by making them stiff. This stiffness can decrease blood flow throughout the body and lead to blood clotting. Breathing in the aerosol from the e-cigarette, even if you aren't the one using it, can lead to blood vessel stiffness and possibly affect your heart's ability to move fresh oxygen to your brain, muscle, liver, and other parts of your body. Ultimately, blood vessel stiffness and blood clotting can increase someone's risk for heart attack or heart disease. A lot of these are particularly important to people who play sports or do other physical activities because these are ultimately making it more difficult for your body to do those activities well. Let's look at how these products increase your risk for heart attack, which obviously is another very serious effect that products like e-cigarettes and vaping can have on the body. Your risk for a heart attack is determined by many factors, such as your genetics, the environment you live in, and your lifestyle. Factors that play a role in your risk for heart attack include your family history, your race, where you live, what kind of air you breathe, what you eat, how much you exercise. You know this from other discussions. Choosing not to use tobacco or nicotine products in general will reduce your overall risk for heart attack or heart disease. Let's imagine the chance of having a heart attack is represented by dice, and the higher the total rolled represents a higher chance of developing heart disease. Someone who does not use e-cigarettes or cigarettes is rolling with only one dice. Now imagine this person starts using e-cigarettes every day. Their chances of having a heart attack would now double. This is a fairly similar amount of damage to the heart as someone who is smoking cigarettes every day. This is one reason e-cigarettes are not considered safer than cigarettes. They both release ultrafine particles and toxins that damage blood vessels, encourage blood clotting, and can lead to heart attacks. Let's complicate this story further by assuming that this person starts using cigarettes too. Whenever they don't have access to their vape, they decide to pull out a pack of cigarettes just to get them to the point where they can get another pod or whatever they're going to use for their vape. Unfortunately, what this does is make it even more dangerous. This would increase their risk for heart attack 5-fold. In other words, they're now gambling with 5 dice. On the bright side, this works the other way too. The risk of having a heart attack can drop immediately after quitting cigarettes. It could also go down after quitting e-cigarettes. Someone could take action right away to protect their heart by stopping any e-cigarette or cigarette use and making things a lot safer for their body. One of the misconceptions I think a lot of people have about vaping and e-cigarettes is that it's harmful because it's just water vapor, or it's just water vapor and healthy things that they've put within pods or liquids that you use. This is basically never true. E-cigarettes and vape pens allow the user to make large clouds that a lot of people who have no education on the topic whatsoever think is just water vapor. In reality, this cloud is a mixture of many different chemicals that were either present in the e-liquid before or produced during the heating process. A vapor is a chemical that has evaporated. An aerosol is a mixture of liquid particles suspended in gas and can contain many chemicals. Instead of just mixing with the air like a pure gas, aerosols can leave behind other things. Vaping is not just vapor, and even what you're expelling into the air can affect the people around you. This is one of the reasons why a lot of people have argued against cigarettes in the past, is because of things like secondhand smoke. The evidence is there that whenever you breathe out vaping or e-cigarettes, you are also leaving behind chemicals in that format too, and thus negatively harming the people around you. One of the things that is most concerning health officials and people who have been fighting against cigarette use, especially in people who are younger than adult age, is that the amount of nicotine contained in these products is drastically more than you would get from cigarettes. This is not saying that the product is inherently more safe or dangerous than a cigarette is, but what it is saying is that it is inherently more addictive than cigarettes are. This leads to a whole lot of people becoming users for, again, like we said earlier at the beginning of the presentation, days to weeks to months to years to decades to lifetime. And again, a lot of people who begin using things like cigarettes to get them from one pod to the next. If you don't know, a standard pack of cigarettes contains 20 cigarettes. There's 1 milligram of nicotine absorption per cigarette, so about 20 milligrams of nicotine delivered to the body from a whole pack of cigarettes. Unlike other e-juices, which may or may not contain nicotine, all salt-based e-juice contains nicotine. According to Juul Labs, one example, one Juul pod contains 41.3 milligrams of nicotine. This is equal to the amount of nicotine you'll find in about 40 cigarettes. How many packs of cigarettes would a Juul pod then be equal to? It's going to be equal to about 2 packs of cigarettes. So that little pod itself is equal to about 2 packs of cigarettes. As mentioned before, this is a high amount of nicotine and can be intense for first-time users. A lot of people trying out things like Juul pods and vaping get sick because they're hit with a blast of nicotine at a level that they wouldn't get from just smoking a cigarette. What this then leads to is that people who start using vaping products are becoming addicted to that nicotine at an incredibly fast pace. One puff bar contains 50 milligrams of nicotine, which is equivalent to 50 cigarettes. How many packs of cigarettes would a puff bar then be equal to? It'd be equal to about 2.5 packs. Another example, one Swarm Valgon cartridge contains up to 90 milligrams of nicotine, or 90 cigarettes. How many packs of cigarettes would a Swarm pod then be equal to? About 4.5 packs. No matter what pod device you're using, all of them contain high levels of nicotine, which is extremely addictive, which keeps you coming back for more. It's hard to overstate how much the pull of nicotine is on the human body. Just a little bit of time with nicotine will make you want more nicotine. It can go anywhere from a fairly light feeling of just needing something to some light anxiety to an overwhelming, nearly crippling urge to have a vape product or a cigarette or whatever product you can get to deliver nicotine. And what these products are going to do is make you get that feeling faster. Ultimately, they want you to become addicted for life because then you become a customer for life. While nicotine is the main villain of this discussion because it is the part of the product that is going to make you come back for more, there are plenty of other things about vaping and e-cigarette products that should make you question the various slogans and secondhand information that's passed around a bit about how it's so much safer than cigarettes. Let's discuss that. Based on what we know about e-juice and liquid, what chemicals would you specifically find in these pods? Let's look at the ingredients that Juul Labs reports and has reported on in the past as being in a Juul pod. Nicotine, the addictive chemical in all pods, is in there. Benzoic acid pairs up with nicotine to help deliver high amounts of nicotine to the brain faster. Glycerol and propylene glycol, common ingredients found in most e-juices, are usually in there. Propylene glycol is not approved by the government for inhaling. The other chemicals include natural oils, extracts, and flavors. What do they mean by extracts and flavors? What else is in this? Well, scientists started to look at the chemicals in the Juul pod e-juice. And guess what? They found these 59 chemicals when they looked at the pod flavors. Why wouldn't they want us to know this? Maybe this will help you answer that question. The names in red represent chemicals that are corrosive, irritants, harmful, toxic, and dangerous to the environment. What you see in orange are chemicals that are harmful, and those in light blue represent chemicals that are irritants. Recently, a Harvard University study found that a toxin named glucan was found in Juul pods. Glucan is commonly found in the outer layer of fungi or fungus. Glucan is known for causing inflammation of airways in the lungs, which can lead to long-term health disease. While it's true that some companies probably are more responsible and try to take some of these chemicals out, what you're going to find is that more often than not, whatever product you're using is going to contain things that are probably going to be harmful for the human body. I'd advise you to do research, look at some of the references that I'll be attaching at the end of this if you want to. Look at these studies and decide for yourself. But ultimately, they're all finding some pretty shocking and concerning things as contained within the delivery method of whatever product you're using. At this point, we're going to have some review questions about the health effects to the body. This is the kind of main and probably most important topic that we've covered so far, so take these questions seriously. Look at them if they're popping up in your handbook or on your screen or whatever program you're using, and do your best to answer those to the best of your ability. Next, we're going to talk about addiction and what that means. As a warm-up for our next topic, let's start with this question. What do you think it means to be addicted? Take a moment to answer that. A lot of what we're going to be talking about is specifically focused on the brain of adolescents, the brain of teenagers, people in middle and high school, because that area is when people are having the most changes as far as learning and development and stuff like that goes. But this applies to basically everybody. People younger than that, people who are in college or grad school, or adults going about their day-to-day life. Essentially, this still affects them too. What a lot of researchers are finding most concerning is how this stuff affects the adolescent brain. The brain of teenagers is wired to learn anything and everything that they find interesting. Some examples are playing sports. There's a lot of people who do more than one. Learning a musical instrument. There's a lot of people trying to learn more than one musical instrument. Or a foreign language, which is a pretty monumental task. Basically anything these teenage brains are doing is trying to do them at a very rapid pace. During this period of life, the brain is still developing itself. In other words, during this period, your brain is at its greatest potential for learning. For sure, one of the goals is for you to do as well as you can in school, but equally important is how you deal with stressful situations in a helpful way. Things like having to navigate friendships. It's probably at its most complicated during times of middle school, high school, etc. How you deal with the good times and bad. How to handle friends when suddenly they change in a way you don't like, which happens a lot in middle and high school for some reason. Other goals may include how to deal with teachers you don't like. How to deal with your first romantic partner who dumps you for some bizarre reason and then you get upset. What you do with those relationships is going to be really important with your life going forward. And these are all normal situations that everybody at different points of their life experiences. What you do to navigate those is going to be affected, unfortunately, both positively and negatively with the things that you're currently doing at the time. Obviously, we're focusing on nicotine, e-cigarettes, tobacco, etc. So this program is going to discuss how it's going to make literally all of those things, from learning to friendships and relationships to extracurriculars. It's going to make them more difficult in one way or another. And it's going to make them more difficult because it affects the brain. Our brain affects how we experience the world around us. It keeps our body functioning, and it also controls our behavior. Some things our brain does without us thinking about it, like breathing in and out constantly. And now that I've mentioned it, you're probably thinking about it, and I apologize for that. While other behaviors we have more control over, like talking or singing. There's even a part of the brain that controls speech and another that controls smell. Multiple areas of the brain are often working at the same time to help us engage in different behaviors. For example, when we're walking, this involves using multiple areas of the brain, starting from our decision to walk, to us standing up, and then taking our first step. It's a process. You've probably had somebody telling you drugs are bad all the way since elementary school, and the reason drugs are bad is because they usually affect the brain. Nicotine is an example of one of these drugs that affects the brain. In general, there's two ways that drugs can affect the brain. Drugs can affect the brain by overstimulating a part of the brain called the reward pathway. The reward pathway is what makes people feel good. It's how, in this case, nicotine makes people feel good. People would not use it if it didn't make them feel good. It's the reason people vape. It's the reason people smoke. It does make you feel good, but that's a false good. Essentially, what these drugs do is they pretend to be our natural chemical messengers, or our neurotransmitters, and they take advantage of the neurons that normally would use those neurotransmitters. I'll be including a link to this video that's also posted in here, and it discusses how understanding addiction as a disease. Essentially, addiction is a disease. Once the brain gets hooked on something, it doesn't want to let that go. And that can extend from anything, unhealthy foods, addictive, containing lots of sugar. The body is being affected negatively to them. To nicotine, same thing. To alcohol, which this video primarily focuses on. Essentially, these things hijack the brain into thinking these are more important than anything else. Instead of getting a good night's sleep, I need to stay up and drink because that's going to make me feel better. Or instead of exercising, I should sit and smoke a cigarette because that makes me feel better. Essentially, it's hijacking things that would make your life better in the overall and replacing them with things that makes your life worse. Now, of course, this differs from person to person how much it affects them, but it tends to affect teenagers more. Teenagers who get addicted to alcohol and tobacco products tend to get addicted at an extremely higher rate than others, a whole lot faster, and it begins to take over their lives in a much more unhealthy way. Once you begin to unpack that nicotine is a drug that affects the brain, then you begin to understand how dangerous this process really is. This next slide discusses the brain on nicotine. Continuing the trend of science, it says in order to understand how nicotine is so good at creating addiction, we must know how it takes advantage of our brains. Nicotine mimics a chemical that our brains produce naturally and easily binds to receptors in the brain that are made for that chemical. When those receptors get filled up, it sets off a chain reaction that leads the brain to feel pleasure. Pleasure is necessary for survival because it encourages us to do activities that keep us alive, like eating. Eating's fun. Sleeping, less fun, but you feel a whole lot better if you do it. And building relationships. However, no matter what kind of device it comes from, nicotine hijacks this pleasure pathway, and it tricks the brain into interpreting the chemical signal as pleasurable and necessary for survival. Continuing to use nicotine in any form will result in addiction. This means that nicotine turns your brain against you so that you feel forced to keep using nicotine just to feel normal. Discussing the addictiveness of these products, there are several features of cigarettes that are designed to make them as addictive as possible. The nicotine levels in cigarettes are controlled by the tobacco companies. This is true of both cigarettes and e-cigs and vapes. What you should keep in mind during all of this is that they want there to be nicotine in their products because you will keep using the product for that nicotine. Next, we'll continue by looking at flavors. Menthol is a substance found in mint plants that cools and numbs the throat to reduce irritation and makes smoking feel smoother, making it easier to keep smoking. Tobacco companies realized this, so they added it to cigarettes, and menthol cigarettes are still a very popular product today. Adding flavor masks the harshness of smoke and makes products more appealing to new users. Flavors are still being used in new tobacco products like in the e-liquid used in e-cigs and vapes. Flavors are found to be especially appealing to young people. Think about if you go buy some ice cream. If you're literally buying vanilla ice cream every single time, you're an extremely boring person, and maybe this argument doesn't apply to you. I'm just kidding, of course. But ultimately, if somebody goes to Baskin-Robbins or Dairy Queen or Cold Stone or wherever they're going to be picking something that has a lot of different flavors, and they're probably not going to be picking the same flavor every time. This is a marketing technique. They're not going to sell as much ice cream if they're just selling vanilla ice cream. It's why the tobacco companies and the e-cigarette companies pushed different flavors extremely heavily, extremely early on, and then got in trouble for it because a lot of people realized that this was attracting kids into smoking e-cigarettes. Beyond just adding flavors into it, ammonia or ammonia compounds are added to cigarettes, which increases the speed at which nicotine is delivered to the brain. Bronchodilators are chemicals that expand the lungs' airways, making it easier for tobacco smoke to pass into the lungs, ultimately delivering more nicotine to the brain. Adding sugar makes tobacco smoke easier to inhale and form acetaldehyde, which enhances nicotine's addictive effects. Don't forget that this design applies to pod-based e-cigarettes as well. That shouldn't surprise you though, because e-cigarette companies followed the playbook from cigarette companies who had been doing it for a very, very long amount of time. Some ingredients are still being identified in e-cigarettes, such as bronchodilators, sugars, and acetaldehyde. Researchers are catching up with studying these recent devices. Nicotine salts in pod-based e-cigarettes act like ammonia compounds, but also hide the harshness of nicotine. If discussing all of these different chemical compounds and things added to e-cigarettes and vape pods sound a lot like science class, it's because it kind of is. A whole lot of people are paid a whole lot of money to develop these products, and specifically to develop these products in the way to get the most bang for the company's bucks. They want people to be addicted to these for life. So they're adding things into these products that will very subtly do things like expand the lungs' airways, making it easier for tobacco smoke to enter, or to make it easier and smoother for you to inhale these. This is a crowd-tested, multi-million-dollar industry that wants you in, and they want you in for your money for a long time. And thus we will wrap up our discussion of these products and their effect on your brain. You're going to have a couple questions come up, and then we'll move on. Kind of similar to our question at the very beginning, but different enough to ask it, is why do you think people start vaping in the first place? If you were somebody who has vaped or smoked or whatever before watching this program, what got you into it? Do a little reflection, answer that question, and we'll move on. Earlier we discussed how pod-based companies have had fruity and sweet flavored pods along with colors in them, and how a lot of this is now being kind of regulated, starting to be regulated by state and federal government programs and things like that. At one point we had over 15,500 e-juice flavor options with names like Banana Butt and Honey Doo Doo. It's important to be aware that all of this is just another example of pod-based companies following well-known advertising strategies from Big Tobacco's playbook. They know that flavors are a great way to attract young customers because they are the group most interested in sweet flavors and bright colors. When you want to get the most money possible, you want to get children addicted to your product so that they will remain consumers of your product for decades. And you give names like Banana Swirl or something like that, you're not trying to attract an elderly 80-year-old person with their foot already halfway into the grave because they've been living unhealthily. You're trying to attract somebody who's never used one of these products before, who likes the taste of banana ice cream, thinking, hey, it would be great if I tried this product. That may sound a little bit cynical, but there have been a lot of discussion, studies, and inquiries into this as a process, and it's unfortunately something that has proven true for a long period of time. This tactic is so effective that flavored cigarettes have been banned since 2009, since extensive research shows that they are more appealing to young people. The pod-based companies, along with other e-cigarettes, have yet to be regulated in this way in a lot of places, though at the time of my recording this, they are starting to become more and more regulated. More and more evidence is piling, proving that these flavors are dangerous in and of themselves. So far, we know that flavors can impair lung function and increase risk for heart disease. Pod-based companies continue to use them because they know it makes products seem appealing and safe to teens. In my own personal experience, while a lot of larger companies are being regulated on this, a lot of smaller ones are still propping up and selling flavors in smaller places like smaller stores and gas stations and stuff like that. Your bigger companies are being regulated at an increasingly fast pace, but your less regulated parts of the industry are not, and they are the parts you should probably be even more skeptical of. Remember that flavored cigarettes have been banned since 2009. Big Tobacco fought extremely hard to keep menthol as a flavor. Historically, the tobacco companies reinforced the popularity of menthol tobacco products by exploiting vulnerable communities. For example, in black communities, a tobacco company would drive a van through districts and give away free cigarettes. Recent studies have concluded that menthol cigarettes lead to increased smoking initiation among youth and young adults, greater addiction, and decreased success in quitting smoking. Removal of menthol cigarettes from the marketplace would benefit public health in the United States, especially among communities of color and other vulnerable groups. Most people who have studied tobacco, nicotine, these products, have been frustrated for a long time. It's frustrating to see how the black community is targeted by tobacco companies when you know that smoking is a major cause of heart disease, which in turn is the number one cause of death for people who are black in many research and studies that have come up. I've attached a video that kind of goes into this discussion on menthol that the program has included. I'd encourage you to watch that whenever you get done with this part of the program as we move forward and look into who the target audience for these products is. You're going to see a lot of ads come up on your screen. I promise that I'm not advertising tobacco products to you. I am showing you the type of advertisements that have been posted around in the past for a point. The point is that these companies target specifically young communities and people to try to sell their products to. In these advertisements, you'll typically see people who look extremely young, who have perfect complexions, who are usually models that are paid by the companies to stand in, hold a jewel pod, and make you think, wow, that person looks cool. They're doing this on purpose. They're doing this to sell these products. There's been increasing concern about how young people have been targeted by these pod-based companies on social media. For example, young social media influencers and other third-party influencers were paid by Juul Labs and other vaping companies to make juuling or vaping look cool. Here's a comment from one social media influencer who Juul Labs paid to promote their product to young people. This one influencer's comments regarding Juuls was liked by over 700,000 people. After Juul stopped paying influencers to post their content, they promoted the devices on social media in other ways, including commenting on people's posts and sharing discount codes. Even after Juul shut down its Instagram page, they still have an active account that is being tagged and posts daily, at least at the time that this presentation was made. It may not be the case anymore. Many social media accounts post videos of young people using these products while giving shoutouts to Juul and other pod-based brands. Don't get trapped by these strategies to attract young people as customers. Why do you think they shut down a lot of these attempts? It's because they got in trouble. Essentially, public outcry and the government forced them to shut down their targeted advertising to young people. It wasn't something that most of them self-opted to do. Now that we've kind of wrapped up our look into messaging and how these companies want to sell to you and to sell to you for your entire life, and we're going to move into the cost of using these products. We're going to start with this talking point. Alex goes through one pod during the school week. How much does Alex spend in a month? If you have any guesses, estimates, maybe you know, go ahead and put in that number and we'll move on. If you have access to a device or you're able to do it in this program, I would encourage you to go to this link. If you don't have access to a device to where you could scan the link or whatever, you can go to the links on this video and I'll post this link there if I'm able to. I would encourage you to check out and calculate what vaping will cost you. Even if a lot of these other things that we've talked about don't really, worry you too much, despite the fact that a lot of that information is incredibly worrying, what should worry you, if nothing else, is just how expensive it is to use these products, and especially how that expense adds up over the course of a lifetime. Countless people that I've talked to, who are people who have smoked or used other products like vape pens and stuff like that, will tell you that it is something they wish they could stop because they know that it's harmful to their health, and even more obvious to them is how much it adds up in their pocketbook. Essentially, the money that they've spent over years and years and years of smoking could have been spent on a number of different things. People who are extremely deeply in debt, who are struggling to pay bills week to week, are still buying packs of cigarettes because it has become something that they cannot do. They are too addicted to stop, even though they don't have the money to do other things. It's detrimentally affecting their lives. What you choose to spend your money on ultimately is a reflection of what you value. For example, someone who spends a large percentage of their income on a nice car likely values the social status and luxury that comes from owning an extremely nice vehicle. Maybe you're just spending a little bit week to week, and that's one of the reasons why people tend to overlook this. Something that costs $5, $10, $15 a week really doesn't seem like a whole lot at the time. But with an addiction like vaping and cigarettes, typically people tend to spend more and more and more on that over time. And you also have to think about how that adds up week to week. Maybe you're somebody who values your personal independence and you want to be able to move out at an early age or pay for a lot of the things in college or grad school or, just as an adult living day to day. Maybe you're somebody who values social justice and you like donating to causes and helping people out. Maybe you just want to travel and go places, or you want to look good and wear, nice clothes and things like that. You're somebody who values technology and having a nice computer and something that you can, play video games on and things like that. Or maybe you just like going to closer experiences like concerts and stuff. What I would encourage you to do is to calculate what you spend week to week if you've been doing one of these, habits for a while, and think about how you could use it on other things. Think about if you spend $15, $20 on, something regarding vaping or cigarettes week to week, how much that will add up by the time you graduate high school or by the time you graduate college or whatever. It's going to add up, and it's going to end up being a pretty huge number that you could have used on a pretty huge amount of other things than what you used on, vaping. Add up the cost, think about the cost and what it would do to impact your life to get rid of e-cigarettes and vaping permanently, and answer these questions as we move on to our wrap up. The Make Your Momentum section is going to probably come up for you in some form, whether it's on paper, whether it's in discussion on a group, or if you're using a digital tool like Google Forms or Nearpod or something, you'll have something come up to kind of discuss everything as we wrap up and tie in our discussion on it. It's going to ask about your decisions to possibly quit, etc. Please take time to really think about this. And if you don't take this presentation into account, talk to some people who, smoke or vape or whatever, specifically adults. Talk to them, and 95% of them are going to tell you that it's one of the biggest regrets of their life. If not because it's affected them in some way health-wise, maybe somebody who has passed due to cancers caused by products like cigarettes. Maybe they say, it's affected them financially and they hate the amount of money that they spend on it. Or they just hate, how it smells or how it makes them look or how they have to hide it from their kids or something like that. Take some time to reflect on this, make your own decisions. But I encourage you not to continue using these products. If you need help to get away from these products, there are a lot of great places you can go to. And these will kind of change with time depending on when you're viewing this video. But initially, Stanford University advertised reaching out to these groups. You text Ditch Jewel to 88709. They give daily quitting tips. Designed with feedbacks from teens and college students who have tried to quit or have successfully quit. If you're having trouble quitting these products, talk to an adult or somebody who has successfully done so. Some other places you can go to would be teen.smokefree.gov. They also have the helpline. If you don't have an adult you can reach out to, you can always reach out to these groups. They will give you great advice. Specifically for people in California, this comes from Stanford. You could try this number to help you out. And they've got a line there to help people quit smoking, vaping, etc. Thank you for watching through this program. I hope it helps you out, and I hope you have an awesome day.